Cardiologist's voice was very calm, which I later learned is what they do when the news is bad. "Mr. Holloway, we need to perform the bypass surgery tomorrow morning. Your left anterior descending artery is 90% blocked. We don't have the luxury of waiting." I was 64 years old, lying in a hospital bed in Phoenix with wires on my chest and an IV in my arm. And my first thought, God help me, was not about dying. It was about my daughter, about calling her, about whether she'd come. My second thought was that I already knew the answer. I called her anyway. She picked up on the fourth ring. I could hear music in the background, something with a heavy bass line, and laughter that cut off when she realized it was me. "Dad, it's kind of late." I told her, "Open heart surgery. Tomorrow morning, the doctor wanted family present." There was a pause. "Then, we're in Scottsdale, Dad. We drove down yesterday. Brendan planned this trip months ago. It's our anniversary, and the resort already charged the whole weekend to the card." I didn't say anything. "I mean, it's not like you have doctors there, right? You're in good hands. What would we even do, just sit in a waiting room?" "That's usually what family does," I said. Another pause. "Dad, don't make this into something it isn't. We'll come see you Sunday when we get back. You'll probably be resting anyway." She hung up. I lay there looking at the ceiling tiles, counting the little perforations in them, the way you do when your mind doesn't know where else to go. Sunday. I was having open-heart surgery in 11 hours, and my daughter would see me Sunday. My neighbor Frank sat with me the whole night. 71 years old, bad knees, drove himself to the hospital at 9 in the evening without me even asking. He just showed up with a cup of coffee from the vending machine and said, "You're not sitting here alone." Frank, who I'd lent my truck to 4 years ago when his transmission died. Frank, who brought over a casserole every week for 2 months after my wife passed. Frank, who was not family by any legal definition, and was the only person in that waiting room when they wheeled me into the OR at 6:15 the next morning. I woke up in the ICU to a text from my daughter. "Hope surgery went well. The resort has the most incredible spa. Thinking of you. Shh." I put the phone face down on the blanket and didn't pick it up again for 3 days. Let me back up, because you need to understand what I had given this woman. My daughter's name is Stephanie. She's 38. She married a man named Brendan 9 years ago, and I am being careful here because I want to be fair. Brendan isn't a bad person. He's just the kind of man who follows wherever comfort leads, and for 9 years, comfort led to me. My wife Carol and I had built a landscaping business over 32 years. Nothing glamorous. We drove the trucks ourselves in the beginning, did the bids, chased the invoices. By the time Carol got sick, we had 41 employees and contracts with 3 commercial property groups in the Phoenix area. When she died, 7 years ago now, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I sold the business to a regional chain for $1.4 million and kept the house she loved and a rental property we'd bought in Tempe. I was not a rich man, but I was comfortable. And Stephanie was my only child. When she and Brendan got married, I gave them $40,000 toward a down payment on their house in Mesa. They stretched to get a place that was, honestly, a little more than they could afford on Brendan's salary as a project coordinator and Stephanie's part-time work at a dental office. But it was a beautiful house. Carol would have loved seeing her daughter in that house. Then the car payment got hard to manage. Then the credit card. Then there was a gap when the dental office cut her hours. I started helping. $3,000 here, $2,000 there. It was never supposed to become permanent. But it did. By year 3, I was sending them $4,500 every month. They had stopped calling it help. They called it the usual when they texted to confirm it had arrived. I told myself it was what Carol would have wanted. Carol would have hated it, actually. Carol used to say that helping people past their limits is just teaching them to drown slower. I knew that. I sent the money anyway. When I had my heart attack, my first one, 3 years before the surgery, which I mentioned because Stephanie barely remembers it, I adjusted my will. I had an estate attorney named Howard Briggs since Carol was sick. Howard is methodical and literal and does not soften news, which is why I like him. After my heart attack, I made the standard updates. The house would go to Stephanie. The Tempe rental would go to a community land trust Carol and I had supported for years. Stephanie would be executor. After my bypass surgery, lying in the ICU with a new scar down my sternum and a text from my daughter about a spa, I called Howard from my hospital bed. I need to change the will, I said. Howard didn't ask why, he just said, "When can you come in?" "Give me 2 weeks," I said. "I need to be able to sit in a chair." The Sunday visit was exactly what I expected. Stephanie came in looking tan and a little guilty, which is worse than just guilty. Brendan had flowers. Grocery store flowers, the kind wrapped in plastic, and he set them on the windowsill without taking off the cellophane. They sat for 45 minutes. Stephanie asked about my diet and whether the hospital was comfortable, and whether I'd thought about moving somewhere smaller, somewhere with a homeowners association that handled the yard. Brendan looked at his phone twice and pretended he wasn't. "We worry about you out there alone," Stephanie said. "Frank looks in on me," I said. "Frank is 71, Dad. He was also the only person here when they took me into surgery." The room got quiet. Stephanie looked at the flowers. Brendan looked at his phone again, then put it in his pocket. "We couldn't just cancel the whole weekend," she said finally. "It wasn't that simple." "I didn't ask you to explain it," I said. "I just answered your question. You asked who was there. Frank was there." They left an hour later. I watched Brendan's Audi pull out of the visitor parking lot from my window. That was when I stopped the monthly transfers. Not dramatically. I didn't call Stephanie and announce it. I just logged into my bank account and canceled the recurring transfer. $4,500 gone from their budget, effective the following month. I also called Howard and went to his office 2 weeks after discharge, walking slowly, still sore, and we rewrote everything. The house would go to a revocable trust with Frank as co-trustee. Stephanie would receive a fixed inheritance of $75,000 payable over 3 years, conditional on my natural death and no legal disputes over the estate. The Tempe rental would continue going to the land trust. I set up a separate custodial account for my granddaughter, Lily, Stephanie's daughter, 9 years old, the one person in this whole situation who hadn't done anything wrong. The account was structured so Lily would receive the funds directly at 25, regardless of what Stephanie did or didn't do. Howard reviewed it twice and said, "This is very clean. Are you certain?" "I'm certain," I said. "Stephanie will contest it." "Let her." The first call came 17 days after I stopped the transfers. "Dad, I think there was a problem with the bank. The deposit didn't come through this month." "There's no problem with the bank," I said. Silence. "Then, what does that mean?" "It means I stopped sending it." More silence. Then Stephanie's voice shifted into something I recognized. The particular tone she used when she wanted to seem reasonable before she stopped being reasonable. "Dad, we have a mortgage. We have car payments. You can't just." "I can," I said. "And I did, Stephanie. I was on a table having my chest opened, and you were at a resort spa. We talked about this. The trip was already planned." "I'm not angry," I said, which was mostly true by then. "I'm just done. Take care of yourself." I hung up. The calls escalated exactly the way you'd expect. Stephanie called 7 times that first day. Then Brendan called, which surprised me. Brendan had never called me about anything practical in 9 years of marriage. He used words like reasonable and communication and what Carol would have wanted. That last one made me set the phone down mid-sentence and not pick it back up. Then the text started. "You're being vindictive. This is elder behavior, Dad. You need to talk to someone. Brendan says if you don't respond by Friday, we're going to have to get Howard involved." I forwarded that last one to Howard, who replied with one sentence, "Let them." What I didn't expect was my son-in-law showing up at my front door on a Tuesday afternoon. He was dressed like he'd come from work, which he hadn't. He'd been laid off the previous year and hadn't fully told Stephanie's side of the family, which I only found out later. He stood on my porch looking simultaneously defiant and desperate, which is a hard combination to pull off. "We need to talk," he said. "We really don't," I said. But I let him in because I am 64 years old and I was raised to let people in. He sat at my kitchen table. I poured him coffee because I am also incapable of not doing that. And then he told me that he and Stephanie were 3 months behind on one of their credit cards, that the mortgage is going to be tight next month, and that he needed me to bridge the gap for a few months while he got back on his feet. I looked at him for a long moment. "Brendan," I said, "do you know what I was doing the morning of my surgery, before they put me under?" He shook his head. "I was asking Frank if he'd call Stephanie afterward in case she didn't check in, because I didn't know whether she'd call to find out if I was alive." I paused. "She didn't, by the way. I had to call her." He didn't say anything. "I'm not going to bridge any gaps," I said. "But I will tell you something for free. Because you drove over here and you were honest with me, which is more than most people manage. You and Stephanie are living at the edge of what you can afford because for 4 years you treated my money like it was a salary. It wasn't. It was a mistake I made, and I'm correcting it. The sooner you both understand that, the sooner you can start building something real." He left the coffee mostly untouched. 3 weeks later, I got a certified letter. Stephanie, through an attorney named Kowalski, was petitioning to have me evaluated for cognitive decline. The petition alleged, and I am not making this up, that my decision to amend my will and discontinue financial support demonstrated a pattern of impaired judgment inconsistent with the decedent's established behavior. They had attached a letter from a doctor I had never met, which Howard later described as the kind of document that reflects poorly on whoever signed it. I sat at my kitchen table and read the letter twice. Then I called Howard. "They filed," I said. "I see it," he said. He'd already received a copy. "We'll respond. This will not go well for them." "How long?" 4 to 6 weeks for a hearing. Judge Marcia Tillman is on the calendar. She does not enjoy having her time wasted. I spent the next month getting my records together, medical files from my cardiologist, Dr. Okafor, showing I was cognitively intact and recovering on schedule, financial records showing the precise amounts I had given Stephanie and Brendan over 4 years, $198,000 in total, which even I was not fully prepared for when Howard laid out the spreadsheet. Texts from Stephanie after the surgery. The spa text. Call log shown 72 missed calls in the month after I discontinued the transfers. Frank came with me to the courthouse. His knees were bad that day and he used a cane, but he was there at 7:30 in the morning in a blue blazer that I think he'd bought for his son's college graduation 20 years ago. I didn't tell him he didn't have to come. I've learned to accept help without arguing. Judge Tillman was a woman in her mid-50s, with reading glasses and an expression that suggested she had heard every variety of human foolishness, and was no longer surprised by any of it. Kowalski opened with a prepared statement about my erratic financial decisions and withdrawal from established family support structures. The judge looked over her glasses at him. "Counselor, the support structures you're describing, were those formalized? A trust, a legal agreement, a documented obligation?" "Well, no, Your Honor, but—" "Then they're not structures, they're habits." She looked at the petition. Mr. Holloway terminated a voluntary arrangement and amended a will that he has every legal right to amend. What specifically constitutes impaired judgment here? Kowalski tried. He talked about the timing, right after the surgery, when I was under stress and emotionally compromised. He talked about the will changes being sudden. He talked, very briefly, about my isolation and dependence on a non-family member, which I understood to mean Frank. That was when I stopped being calm. I'm not proud of it. Howard touched my arm. I exhaled. The judge looked at me. "Mr. Holloway, do you wish to address the court?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "Over 4 years, I gave my daughter and her husband $198,000. I gave them the down payment on their house. I gave them monthly support because I thought they needed help. When I was admitted to the hospital for emergency bypass surgery, my daughter was at a resort in Scottsdale. She did not come. The friend the petitioners are calling an isolating influence is the man who sat with me until 6 in the morning and made sure I had someone's hand to look at before I went under anesthesia." I paused. I amended my will because I had a near-death experience and decided to be honest about my relationships. That is not impaired judgment. That is the clearest thinking I've done in years. The courtroom was quiet for a moment. Judge Tillman looked at Kowalski. This petition is denied. She set it down on her bench like she was setting down something she didn't want to touch again. Furthermore, Mr. Holloway is awarded legal costs. Ms. Holloway and Mr. Tillman, Kowalski's client, will reimburse $9,500 within 45 days. She looked at Kowalski one more time. Counselor, the medical letter attached to this petition is something you may want to discuss with whoever provided it. I won't say anything more specific than that. The gavel came down. In the parking lot, Frank shook Howard's hand and then shook mine. His eyes were wet, which he addressed by looking at the sky and saying, "Sun's bright today." "It really is," I said. I had missed calls from Stephanie before we even reached the car. 11 of them by the time Frank pulled out of the parking lot. I listened to the first voicemail. Her voice was shaking, and she was doing what she always did when cornered. She was reframing. This was all a misunderstanding. Kowalski had advised them that this was a formality. She had never meant to cause problems. She was worried about me. She was still worried about me. She just wanted to talk. I deleted it. I saved a copy to a folder on my phone and deleted it. That evening I sat on my back porch in the October air, which in Phoenix passes for cool, and I thought about the $198,000. Not with anger exactly, something more like clarity. I spent 4 years writing checks because I was lonely, and because giving felt like being needed, and because after Carol died I didn't know how to be a father without being a provider. I had confused the two things. I had let the confusion stand because correcting it would have required a difficult conversation, and I didn't want the difficult conversation. I wanted Sunday dinners and calls on my birthday and the sense that my daughter was close. You can't buy that. I should have known. Lily called me the following Saturday. She called from a friend's house which told me she didn't want her mother to know. "Grandpa, Mom and Dad had a really big fight last night. Are you safe, sweetheart?" "Yeah, I'm at Emma's. But Grandpa, they were fighting about you, and about money, and Mom was crying." I kept my voice steady. "That's their argument to have, not yours. Are you doing okay in school?" "Yeah, I got an A on my history project about Harriet Tubman. I'd love to hear about it sometime." "Grandpa, are you mad at Mom?" I thought about how to answer that honestly, at a level that a 9-year-old could receive without being burdened by it. "I'm not mad," I said. "I'm just choosing to take care of myself right now." "That's allowed." "Okay," she said, in the voice of a child deciding to trust that. "Can I still come for Thanksgiving?" "You can always come for Thanksgiving," I said. The months that followed were quieter than I expected, but not the good kind of quiet. The kind that has weather in it. Brendan found a new job. Howard heard through the county filing system that they'd sold one of their cars and refinanced the house, which suggested they were finally reckoning with their actual income rather than the one they'd been pretending to have. The $9,500 legal reimbursement came in on the 44th day, which I noted without comment. Stephanie didn't call for 6 weeks. When she finally did, I answered, because I had decided that answering was different from surrendering. "I'm not calling to argue," she said. "All right. She stopped. Started again. "Kowalski told us the petition was strong. He said judges took these seriously when there was a pattern of behavior." "There was a pattern," I said. "It wasn't mine." Another pause. Then, quietly, "Did you really have to change the will?" "Stephanie, I almost died. I was allowed to look at my life clearly. It felt like a punishment." "It felt like a decision," I said. "You weren't there when I needed you. You showed up Sunday with plastic-wrapped flowers and asked if I'd considered a smaller house. That's the information I had. I made decisions with it." She was quiet for a long time. "I didn't think it would be that serious." "I know," I said. And I did know. That was the thing I'd had to sit with. She genuinely hadn't thought it would be that serious. She'd grown so accustomed to me handling things, including emergencies, that she'd stopped believing I could be in real danger. I had made myself so reliable that I'd made myself invisible. That's not something I can fix, I added. That's something you have to think about. She didn't contest the will after that. December. Frank and I drove up to Sedona for the day. His daughter lives there, and we had lunch with her and then drove the Oak Creek Canyon Road in the late afternoon when the light goes red gold on the sandstone. Frank doesn't talk much in the car, which I appreciate. I've known him 12 years, and we've gotten comfortable with the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. "You doing all right?" he said somewhere around Slide Rock. "Better than I was," I said. "Stephanie." "Working through it, slowly." He nodded, watching the road. Carol would have hated all of this. Carol would have seen it coming 20 years ago and said something I wasn't ready to hear. He laughed at that. Soft, private, yeah, she would have. We didn't talk about it anymore. Lily came for Thanksgiving, as promised. Stephanie and Brendan dropped her off and drove away, which suited everyone. Frank came too, and his daughter drove down from Sedona, and we had far too much food for 4 people, plus a 9-year-old, which is exactly the right amount. After dinner, Lily sat beside me on the porch in her coat while the grown-ups cleaned up inside. She was looking at the yard, the one Carol had planted 30 years ago, which I have maintained imperfectly since then. "Grandpa, Mom said she was sorry." "When did she say that?" "In the car, on the way over. She didn't know I heard." She paused. "She wasn't saying it to you. She was saying it to Dad, I think. Like, sorry for how things went." I looked at the rosemary bush Carol had planted in the corner, which I have accidentally overwatered twice, and it has survived anyway. "Sometimes sorry takes a while to get to the right person," I said. Lily thought about that. "Is that okay?" "I think so, as long as it gets there." She leaned against my arm, the way she had since she was small, and we sat like that for a while. Inside, I could hear Frank and his daughter laughing at something, the clatter of dishes, the ordinary sound of people in the house. I had almost traded this, all of it, for the version of my life where I kept writing checks and pretending the quiet on the other end of the phone was closeness. 3 weeks before Christmas, Stephanie called and asked if she could come over. Just her, not Brendan. She came on a Saturday morning and I made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table, which is where the real conversations happen in any house. She didn't ask about money. She didn't mention the will. She talked about Lily's school play, about Brendan's new position, about a repair they needed on the furnace, and how strange it felt to handle it themselves. "We figured it out," she said with something in her voice I hadn't heard from her in years. Not pride exactly, more like surprise at herself. "Called 3 companies, compared quotes, chose the middle one. It was, I don't know, it was fine." "It usually is," I said. She looked down at her coffee. "I'm not going to pretend I handled everything right." "I know." "I didn't think you were really. I thought you were exaggerating. About being scared. About needing someone there." "I wasn't exaggerating." "I know that now." She looked up. "I'm sorry, Dad, for the resort. For all of it. For letting Brendan talk me into the petition. I knew it was wrong when we filed it. I was scared of losing the money, and I let that become bigger than it was." I looked at my daughter, 38 years old. Carol's eyes, Carol's jawline, Carol's way of tilting her head slightly when she was being honest about something hard. I had missed her. I had missed who she used to be before comfort made her careless. "I'm not going to change the will," I said. "Not right now. Maybe not ever." She nodded. "I'm not asking you to." "But I'm not going anywhere either," I said. "I'm 64 with a repaired heart and a good cardiologist, and Frank checking in every other day. I plan to be here for a long time, and I'd like you to be part of that. On different terms." "What terms?" "Honest ones," I said. "You come because you want to come, not because of what's in an envelope at the end of the month. If something goes wrong with me again, you answer the phone. And if Lily ever asks why things changed between us, you tell her the truth. You don't make me the villain of that story." Stephanie was quiet for a moment. I can do that. Good. We finished our coffee. She helped me repot a plant Carol had started from a cutting, the one I'd been meaning to repot for 3 months. We didn't hug when she left. We're not there yet. But she looked back from the driveway and raised a hand, and I raised mine, and that was something. That night I sat in my garage with the hood up on the old Chevelle I'd been slowly restoring since Carol passed. 1970, the original 454, and it runs now, though it didn't when I started. I turned the key and listened to the engine settle into its idle. That particular sound, deep and even, the sound of something that was broken being patient enough to be put back together. Frank's porch light was on across the street. Inside the house, the custodial account I'd set up for Lily was growing exactly the way it was supposed to. Howard had filed the final amended will. My cardiologist had cleared me for light exercise and said my numbers were, improbably, better than before the surgery. I thought about Carol. I thought about how she'd have sat in the passenger seat of this car and said something dry and accurate that I wasn't ready to hear. I thought about how she'd built a business with me and raised a daughter with me and understood, long before I did, that love without limits isn't love. It's just spending. I'd had to learn it the hard way, lying in a hospital bed watching a clock, waiting to see whether my daughter would answer the phone. But I had learned it. The Chevelle idled on, steady and rebuilt, filling the garage with something that sounded, more than anything else, like a second chance. I keep thinking about the ceiling tiles in that ICU room. The little perforations, hundreds of them, and how I counted them at 2 a.m. because my daughter was at a resort spa and I needed something to look at that wasn't my phone. There's a version of the story where I stay angry, where the $198,000 and the plastic-wrapped flowers and the petition about cognitive decline become a wound I carry around and show people. I understand that version. I lived close to it for a while, but anger that size tends to eat the person holding it, and I had already given Stephanie and Brendan enough of me. I wasn't going to give them that too. What I've come to understand, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit, is that what happened between us wasn't really about the surgery. The surgery was just the moment the truth got loud enough that I couldn't talk over it anymore. The truth was that I had spent 4 years confusing generosity with relationship. I wrote checks because I thought it was the same as being close. It isn't. It never was. Closeness is Frank showing up at 9 p.m. with vending machine coffee. Closeness is a 9-year-old calling from her friend's house to say she got an A on her Harriet Tubman project. Money is just money. What strikes me now is how much courage it takes to do the right thing when the right thing costs you something real. Stephanie didn't come to the hospital not because she was a bad person at her core, but because she had quietly over years lost the habit of doing hard things. I had made her life too comfortable, and comfort, when it goes on long enough, starts to look like character. It isn't. Character is what you find out about yourself when the comfortable option disappears. Brendan, sitting at my kitchen table, hat in hand, asking for a bridge loan, that took something. Not much, but something. And when I told him the truth, instead of writing the check, I think something in that conversation landed, even if it took months to show up. And Stephanie, I won't pretend the coffee that December morning fixed everything. It didn't. But she came without an agenda. She sat at Carol's kitchen table and said the actual words, and that is harder than people give it credit for. It takes a particular kind of clarity to look at what you've done and name it honestly, without excuses dressed up as explanations. That clarity is what I've been waiting for. Not the apology exactly, the clarity behind it. I think about what I want Lily to take from all of this when she's old enough to understand it fully. I want her to understand that your character is built in the moments when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed. That real intelligence isn't about knowing the right answers. It's about being honest with yourself when you're wrong. And that the hardest thing any of us ever does is get back up after we've let ourselves down and keep going anyway. Not because we expect a reward, but because it's who we decided to be. The Chevelle runs now. I turn the key and it catches every time. I built that from nothing, piece by piece, with patience I didn't know I had. Some things take longer than they should. Some things are still worth finishing.